thank you very much for coming. The idea is to have a routing area chairs training session. This is the initial session, and depending on our discussion, it may be the first of a number. The agenda is, the administrivia. I mentioned that we're recording the session, and that we'll also have a time at the end for unrecorded discussion. This is the agenda. Why are we doing this? What would you like to get out of it? What do we think might help you all? And what do you think might help you? And then once we've discussed those, how do we deliver the training, and what are the actions and next steps in order to make this happen? So we're doing this because we want to help you, our working group chairs, do even better and get our working groups to deliver in a timely and efficient fashion. We want to keep the routing area effective, relevant, and timely. And in order to do this, a lot of conversation comes back to the chairs could do. And to my mind, that means we need to actually be supporting you as our chairs and do the training, the empowerment of the chairs so that you feel comfortable making the decisions and doing the driving and helping to keep the routing area relevant, timely, and effective. Feel free to raise your hand to ask questions, or I suppose you could try just interjecting unless there's lots of folks who are trying to go all at the same time. Okay, much of this is not surprising. So our goals, we want our working groups to be effective, efficient, have good quality, be relevant, and be speedy. So at the end of the day, the question is really, what do we need to give you to make this happen? We want the chairs to meet our expectations. Don't worry, we'll tell you on the next slide what some of those are, and we can discuss and refine. We want to make sure that you have the tools that are necessary to have the power. Those are both tools like data tracker and understanding the rules and processes, but also feeling that you have the authority and support in order to make the decisions you need to make. And part of that's about giving you the feeling of power and control. It doesn't matter if you have control, if you don't feel like it, you're not going to be able to go and carry out the functions that you need to be doing. And finally, we'd really like to build a team of routing chairs. We have a lot of working groups in the routing area, and while obviously lots of you talk to each other at the same time, there's also not, I think, sort of a sense of we are the routing area chairs and being able to communicate and ask questions of each other or find out when a problematic situation happened in the past or how people dealt with things. It's sort of apprenticeship from one co-chair and asking the ADs, and I'd like to be more of a group feeling where people can ask and get support from each other. So here are some expectations. We want the chairs to actually steer and manage the working group to fulfill the charter. So there's three aspects to this. Steering it. This is deliberately guiding what the working group is doing, guiding the conversations to make sure that the necessary discussions happen. Manage. Unfortunately, this all comes back to project management. Actually, if we want to have work done in a timely fashion, we need to be managing the work and the delivery of that work, and then making the work timely. We want to facilitate a good working environment. Sorry, any questions before I go on? Okay. So we want to facilitate a good working.
Yeah, Alia, the hard bit in this managing is how do we stop work that seems to be gratuitous or trivial or out of keeping with the general direction of a protocol or whatever.
Right. I'm not going to try and answer that question now, partly because I think it's going to take some discussion and partly because we're trying to go over different aspects. But yes, I'm deeply aware of the need for that.
So I mean, when you say empowering the chairs, I want to know exactly how empowered we are. in that
Yes.
direction? Okay, thank you.
I think the answer is yes. And this comes in a little bit when we talk about chartering discussion. We have a lot of working groups that have very open charters, and the question is, the charter is supposed to support you. And if you need a charter to make it easier to say, no, this is a bad idea, we can work on that. If we can talk about it, but yes, I'm aware that is a problem, and figuring out how to do it.
So just so you know, I'm taking notes of things that get said, and we will add them to the list of things that we are considering, or you are considering, as topics for training.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the working group should fulfill its charter. It also needs to be a good working environment where the working group can get stuff done as a team. Teams can have common goals. They can also have uncommon goals. But as a team, as a working group, we should have some common goals. And one of the roles of the chair, which I think most of you are used to doing, is connecting people as appropriate, making sure the groups of people who have common interests get connected up to work together and to feel comfortable working together. We also feel like we need to build, the working group should have a sense of pride and ownership for its work. And some of the groups absolutely have this already. This is not, we're not saying any of these expectations or all of these expectations are things that are missing, but these are what we're looking for in working groups and in working group chairs, right? And we want the working group to have the tools to develop stuff so that they're able to move forward and make good progress. We need chairs to actually build consensus, not just judge it, and understand that consensus is not reached into all the issues that we discussed and addressed, right? That it's a process to get to consensus, and it doesn't just automatically happen. And finally, we want specification quality. We want to be progressing technically robust, good drafts that are needed and people want to or have implemented.
Can I make another comment?
Please.
Building consensus, in my opinion, doesn't mean taking two different solutions and putting them all in one draft. And I've seen that happen too many times. Or pushing two drafts forward as the consensus. Now,
absolutely.
Sometimes we can avoid it, but I'd like to discuss how we can prevent that in the future, or
yes.
at least minimize it.
Yes, absolutely, and agreed. There is a really good read of an RFC that Pete Resnick just wrote about judging consensus, which if anyone hasn't read it, and I know I hadn't read the previous version until it was close to RFC, I'd recommend going and reading that. Do you remember the number? I think it's like 72 something, but.
Yeah, I think you have the first two digits correct. It's sufficiently near the bottom of the new list that it's easy to find.
Okay, so yes, I agree with you, and yes, consensus training is absolutely one of the things we want to talk about.
Is this the one by Pete, Adrian?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions before we go on from this slide? Okay, so here are some things that Adrian and I think you might need. We're not trying to train on these topics now because we have the schedule an hour and a half. There's no way. But we're trying to explain what we think might be of value for our chairs. So one is talking about the myth of volunteer, and I should say, these slides, they're follow-on slides to this particular one. So if you feel like this doesn't go into enough depth, it's coming. So one, talking about the myth of volunteerism in the IETF, particularly in the routing area. Most people, not everybody, but most people are participating from other than individual motivations, at least some of the time. Training on consensus, as we talked about, training on politics in the IETF, how to handle difficult people, how to build proactive groups. Some of the details of specific IETF process. From the AD perspective, we deal with a lot of process all the time and the tail end of the process. And so it's very easy to forget that the exceptions or the tail end pieces of the process are things that working group chairs may not be exposed to on anywhere near as frequent a basis. And so one of the questions there is what kinds of documentation of process or things in the wiki or such might be useful. Project management within the IETF. This, of course, is always tricky when you don't have direct lines, reports. How do you actually do the project management? How do we get things appropriately done? Understanding and living with the charter and how to steer work with an open-ended charter. Any comments or suggestions for additional areas?
I'm not sure how to raise hands. You said raise hands, but I don't know how to do that. So I'll just talk. The one additional thing is what makes a good PS.
Okay, that sounds good. Adrian, you got that?
I certainly have.
Okay. Yeah, Eddie, please don't not talk because you're not sure how to raise your hand. Oh, I see Sue's got her hand raised.
It's on the bottom of the chat participant screen. I want training or discussions about new ways to do draft like GitHub. I want to see if we can improve the process of being able to do collaborative drafts when we're doing a design group, so we can move the design group faster. I would like to see about how we do online interim meetings in order to have small work groups work about things. You know, I don't know if there's some place between a design group discussion where you have it online and an interim meeting, but I'd like to find out what the parameters are about that. And better tools for putting more stuff up on the wiki, getting larger file sizes up. Those are all specific, but they would be part of better tools.
Yes.
Yep, got it.
Okay, thanks. Lou?
Well, I didn't realize we were going to go into tools. One tool that would be really nice is a meeting scheduling tool, as in an agenda scheduling tool.
Okay. Sounds good. Anything else? Okay. I will continue on then.
Oh yeah, I forgot one. If we're doing network management portions of our spec, what's the new definition of what has to be there?
Yes. The hi, gang is coming to a working group near you. Yes, that's a good point too. Actually, Adrian, that might be something we can talk a little bit about at the routing area open meeting.
Yes, and it is changing. You're right, Sue. It's changing under our feet and developing, and that would be something where we could usefully get the ops guys to come in and tell us what their expectations are and what the latest and greatest ways of doing things are.
Okay. So moving on. Sorry, let me back up. Okay, so next one is we have a myth and a belief that in the IETF we are all volunteers and individuals. Yes, that's true, but we need to understand how affiliations affect behavior. We need to explore the right way to motivate contributors, think about how to work with different cultures, what happens when affiliations change or work priorities change, and the impact that that has on work that's going on in the IETF. So the idea is we could do some training or discussion around this. Does that sound interesting? Don't all raise your hands at once. Okay.
I would say it's necessary.
Okay, that's good to hear. As what I'm looking for is this useful? Do you feel like you already know it? Of course, if you already know it, then we'd really like your help with coming up with some of the training. Okay. All right, let me continue on. I'm not reading in real time chat. Yes?
I really think this is useful, and multiple cross cultures could be useful in setting expectations and getting rid of drafts that aren't going to really see the light of day as far as being implemented.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So next is consensus in politics. Judging consensus is one thing. It's talked about how do you drive consensus, how do you handle when it's being blocked or distorted by politics, how do you navigate these situations. This is the kind of thing that may come up in each of the working groups only occasionally, but if we pool knowledge across the working groups and actually have joint discussions, we may find and be basically lessons learned, what worked, what didn't work, get other ideas and suggestions for how to resolve particular situations that are going on. Politicization of the process. We've got process leanings, we've got people who are doing process for the sake of process, and this can really drive the working group in bad ways. I'm guilty of having read an interesting presentation about security where one of the ways of sabotage is to discuss was holding strictly to the details of the process in order to stall the working group, to stall the work. And I think that there are times when we have that going on, right? So the question is, how as chair...
We're in danger of becoming the ITU.
I think that there are better ways of working, absolutely.
I was just being outrageous, you know, just for effect.
I completely appreciate outrageous discharge. Yes, this is my concern, right? If we get into the point where we don't come out with timely solutions that actually matter, that people are actually implementing, and we spend our time sitting around talking about whether something belongs in an architecture or a framework, and we've forgotten how to do consensus that actually results in single or reasonable implementations for solutions. Single solutions for implementation, or at least a reasonable subset based on the different deployment scenarios. We become less and less relevant, and that's really part of the concern. It's not that we're irrelevant now. We're not obviously irrelevant now, and it's not that we're in any deep danger right now, but we are seeing changes in the routing industry, and I do feel like we really need to be, the IETF needs to be more mobile, and particularly the routing area, to get stuff done effectively and useful things and timely. Anyway, range off. Next page. Working with people. We have rare but difficult situations. Again, this is a time where talking to other working group chairs, getting insight can help. You know, how do you deal with people who are just disruptive or won't stop when they're in the rough, or who bully or are abusive, right? We have tools. It's always painful and sensitive, which also means that it's frequently maybe useful to have a location and a set of folks who you can feel comfortable talking to and asking questions of for how to handle it. And you know, of course, Adrian and I are here, but I'd rather also that you all feel comfortable talking to each other about these types of things and figuring out, you know, what are goods and bads. I mean, personally, my knowledge is based on what I've seen and when I was a working group chair, right? So it's not that being an AD, you know, blesses you with magical knowledge. I think that having group discussions about some of this stuff, or having the feeling that you can go and talk to other chairs who you're comfortable with or who you know may have run into similar situations, could be really useful. In addition to the difficult problems, we're not just talking about difficult problems. We also want to actively make it, the IETF that is, and open standards being inclusive. How do we team build? And some of this is the environment, the communication tone. How do we encourage proactive behavior? And quite frankly, at the moment, we're suffering. Sorry, I see other people trying to talk a little bit. ACE or Jim? No? Okay.
Sorry, my daughter's in the room.
Okay. I wasn't the one who was trying to talk, but it did occur to me that allowing everybody to feel comfortable coming from many cultures and personalities is a little bit of a trade-off versus trying to stop bad work from going forward, because if there's something we think is bad work, first of all, it might be our opinions, others may disagree, but if we sort of stop it or dump on it, some people may feel they've been dumped on.
So with what Ross has said, the last three, we've all been talking about the same issue of how do you kill a draft that clearly has no consensus without being, you know, prejudicial of the draft. You know, maybe if we had some criteria that we could point to, you know, before they don't have to be hard and fast, but before a draft is accepted as a working group document.
Documents can have rough consensus in favor when they're basically crap. And then we send them to the ADs, and the ADs complain that we sent them crap. Well, we knew it was crap, but there was clear working group consensus in favor of it.
But we also are the technical guardians. This goes back to the pride and ownership in your working group and what your working group's doing.
Well,
and
except, I mean, so the mass of participants in the IETF is not the technical guardians. You and I can say no to a document if there's consensus in the working group that it's a good idea.
Only if it's
I think that's a very good point to raise and discuss. And I've noted two things coming from it. The availability of criteria for acceptance of work to be used as a heavy stick, and what to do with rough consensus for crap.
Yep. Here on the second one.
Okay.
Oh, actually,
but it's the chair's role to educate the group of why it's crap. And ultimately, if you fail and the group wants to proceed, they have to figure out who's going to submit it and bring it forward and shepherd going forward.
There is no reason that a chair should have to shepherd a draft that they do not fully support. They may need to find a shepherd. But if there's not someone who's willing to come up and do the shepherd role for a draft, and by the way, I think in general we're encouraging chairs not to be the ones doing the shepherd role, then that says something about how strong that consensus and support in the working group is, right?
I wasn't talking about cases where there was any trouble finding a shepherd.
No, but I heard George say, one second, Mike. I heard George say that as a chair, you have to, if the working group has consensus, you need to go and shepherd and promote the draft. Anyway.
It wasn't me who said that, but it was said.
I'm sorry, George.
It was Lou, and my point was you don't have to shepherd it, nor do you need to appoint the shepherd.
You don't have to shepherd it, and you can ask the authors to find a shepherd for you.
But that doesn't solve the problem. This is a key problem, issue, and that is if the chairs recognize the document is flawed and not good and shouldn't be advanced, but the working group publicly is saying, ship it, you've got to deal with that head on. And the only way you can really deal with that head on is to call a spade and get the help of other people in the working group who may be kind of hesitant to speak publicly this way, but generally will speak privately that way.
But on the high end of that argument, I would ask, how do you tell the difference between a document that is crap, that has large support in the working group, and a situation where the chair just happens to be one of the guys who's in the rough?
I think that's pretty obvious in most cases, to be honest, and that's a judgment call. And, and if a chair is doing this all by themselves and everybody's telling them you're wrong, that's a wake-up call that maybe they are in the rough, and then they need to get other support. But this is a case where you've got to, you can't go it alone. If you go it alone, you're in trouble. But if your ADs back you up, you're not going it alone. And if there's other, technically respected members of the community that back you up, you're not going it alone.
And you don't have to go it alone. One of the points is as ADs, we are here to back you up. These are the other working group chairs to talk to, as well as people who are technically active in the working group. But I hear loud and clear that this is a real problem and something that we need to actively have some training on, and it sounds like sooner rather than later. This is clearly a hot button, which is not, frankly, surprising to me. Michael, I see that you have your hand up. Did you want to say something? Thank you for raising your hand.
I could comment on my question about how is it that a document has consensus and yet the chairs disagree? That sounds to me like it sounds like somehow voting rather than some kind of rough consensus. But I don't think that's worth answering. But what I actually wanted to suggest is that I actually find it difficult to find shepherds, and that in the thought that every person out there should be capable of becoming a shepherd because it helps everybody, I think that the IETF as a whole needs some kind of document shepherd training. I don't know how to get that to the people that most need it, but I think it's something that would be very useful for chairs because it would give us a list of even if we had a list of people that, like, I'm willing to be a document shepherd for a document, some list we can go through, that would be even good too.
Okay, for the document shepherd training, do you think that having, we're getting some background noise. This member is not muted to see it. Thank you.
Better?
Much better. Thanks. So for the document shepherd training, that is a good point. Do you think that having a discussion webinar which goes through the process, showing people what's involved, why, reminds them of the RFC and so on, would be useful?
I think it's worth plenary time.
Okay.
But I also think it should be a recurring Sunday afternoon thing.
Okay. So, Adrian, can you make a note of that? And I'd like to say we are starting to rattle a little bit on the training as opposed to what to train on. And I'm letting that happen because I'm interested in seeing which training is so useful that you want to get to it right now. But I also want to get through all of the different topics and have time for the discussion afterwards. So I'm going to move on from this slide. And go on to understanding and knowing IETF process. So, 90% of the problem is finding out the process, and the other 90% is figuring out how to apply it, right? It's what's normal working group and document process, what are the steps, how much work's required, handling exceptions. And the question is, obviously, we have various RFPs that describe this. We have sort of general, this is how it's been done. We have some data tracker training that has happened, but I think that it would be useful to have a little bit more training both on the data tracker side and also on the bluntly, what does a flow chart of it look like? And making sure that the new chairs are comfortable with doing this and are familiar and comfortable with the process. Any comments or questions here? As is more a on track. I guess I haven't heard a lot of really good things yet about track for one of the tools, but that's something we can talk about when we're looking at the training on IETF process to help decide what aspects are important to do. Okay. Next, project management. And this is a place where I think we fall down a lot, which is how do you plan working group work? How do you track the issues, micromanage, what can you delegate, how do you pay for it? How do you get people to do things, and what are working group milestones for, and when do you want to change them? So one of the problems a lot of the time is we end up running on cycles that are centered around IETF meetings and other work doesn't get done. Sorry, Jeff, you have a question, comment?
After you're done, thanks.
Oh, that's okay. So basic point here is how can we do project management in the context of the IETF with the understanding of volunteers who are nonetheless trying to actually get work done for a business reason and have motivation and so on. Jeff, now go ahead.
So the things that I find that I end up doing that make my life easier for project management type stuff, a significant portion of it is effectively a good calendar and a good to-do list with timers. And well, the data tracker is very handy to tell you what your work items are. And we have the track system, which looks like it's good for creating tickets for individual things. The component that we sort of want from a standard project manager's toolbox is the ability to take that list of work, which may or may not be documents. Data tracker is very document-centric, and that's great, but a lot of the things that we need to do are not specifically documents. So for example, if we have working group last call in progress and there's a number of issues open, sure, you could assign issues to track tickets, but what you really care about is have specific people who said they're going to review, have they actually chimed in, has a thing that was associated with a work item been done on the time that's involved, what things are coming up that are about to expire, being able to roll those things forward if necessary, potentially periodically. And honestly, I do the majority of my work using just simple Mac-based calendar application and to-do list and have a bunch of timers firing. So once on Mondays, I'll ping various people robotically about a bunch of things that they agreed to do. And sometimes I'll actually ping chairs about things that look like they're ready to advance and just need a little bit of a push. So getting that type of tool as an available item doesn't solve project management as a whole, but it's one of those enablers that probably reduce the work involved.
Okay, yes. My other observation, which is a slightly different one on project management, is one of the problems that I see is lack of common context. Things get done quickly around IETF because most people who are interested are checked in, paying attention, and have read the draft and can respond quickly. Working group last calls frequently work because people know this is the 2-week period that we're going to focus on this draft. And I wonder about ways that we could increase the understanding that, okay, this is a common period that anyone who's interested in this should focus and respond, and then we can get, those conversations where if everyone's focused and has context would take a day or two to just get through, really 10 minutes in person, versus what happens frequently on mailing lists, which is one person has context, asks a question, the other person doesn't get context back for 3 weeks, responds, the first person has lost context by that point, needs to go back and review, and then the conversation can trail on for weeks and miss, well, months even, and miss some of the relevancy and, you know, nuances that one would have if everyone had context at the same time. There's another, it's a different aspect than the are you getting work done, but it's the creating a context where one particular discussion or a particular, doesn't have to be just one on the mailing list, obviously, but one or a few particular conversations are happening in a timely fashion. Anyway, this is, I guess, rattling again into what the training might be like, but some ideas.
So there's a follow-on item, you know, along with to-do lists that ties directly into what you were talking about, which is if you're talking about traditional project management, you know, complete with Gantt charts and that sort of thing, the item that you're really talking about is pipelining. And we have the bandwidth of the group, the bandwidth of the chairs, and we're trying to actually maximize throughput through those things. Being aware of the timing involved, the to-do lists are good for that sort of thing, but we don't really have good tools to help us push pipelining. You know, part of that's, you know, which individuals may actually be focused on something. You know, just as an example, running too many working group last calls in parallel don't make sense because it distracts the group. Similarly, we want to actually make sure that if there are design teams separately working on things, that they're all making forward progress. We could solve this sort of thing through tools. That's one thing that's helpful. Another thing that would potentially be helpful is an exercise in calendar scouring, because it's been my observation that there are times of the year, and you know, sometimes related on fixed things like, you know, August is a horrible time to ping anybody in Europe for anything for obvious reasons. The first week after IETF is usually a horrible time to actually try to get stuff done because people are trying to empty their inboxes. You know, just trying to actually lay out the calendar as a way to help us figure out when we can get stuff done.
Yes, and that's also something where we can share it across. Ed, did you have a comment?
No.
Okay. All right, let me continue on starting project management. Working with your charters. The charter governs your work, right? As a working group chair, it's supposed to be there to support you. It's supposed to make it easier for you to do your jobs. Some are precise and focused, bounding and saying this is what you're allowed to do. Some are more open-ended. How do you get to the focus? How do you stick to quality ideas? Certainly my perception at this time is that rechartering or doing slight modifications to charter is not too hard to add in. So, you know, this can also be a tool for saying, that's not in the charter, so we can't talk about it now, or we don't want to include it now, even though you know it's easy enough to add something that there's actual real excitement and enthusiasm for from the working group, right? So working with your charter, with the pros and cons of the different types. We have a lot of charters that haven't been revisited in a long time. And, you know, that may have pros and that may have cons. In general, we have a lot of really good experienced chairs who've been doing this for a while. So talking about the charters is figuring out what's the best thing to help you all get what you want to have done in the working group done. Okay, so that's what we have. I'd like to go over to you now to talk about what training you need, what tools you need, how can we empower you, and then after 15 minutes or so, we'll go off of recording and have more frank discussion as well, in case that proves useful. So don't all speak at once, but get started. Anyone want to raise their hand or just speak up? Did we miss stuff? Michael?
Hi. I think I need some kind of, I'm going to say, cultural sensitivity training. Specifically, I need to know how to politely say, your draft is crap, in other cultural contexts, and figure out what, you know, what is it they're trying to do here, without kind of discouraging participation.
Okay, noted.
There are some cultures where you just don't tell people your draft is crap.
Well, okay. So I need to know what those cultures are and what do I do in that context. And at this point, I find myself mostly being, I'm going to say, maybe passive-aggressive, which is, you know.
Ross, I think that there is always a way to say no. In some cultures, it is more complicated than others, depending on the relationships, but there's always a way. And even when it's complicated, we need the tools to be able to say so, because if we can't tell folks that doesn't work, we can't move on from there to, and here is how you can get better if your objectives are foo, bar, and bots.
Well, part of the issue also is crap comes in many different forms and levels, and some crap is harmless and not really all that awful, and other crap is like really dangerous. And I've been inclined to focus more on the stuff that I think is really dangerous.
So is that a separable issue that we should look at, which is how to measure the stickiness of crap in terms of the consistency, how damaging crap really is, because there may be an argument that providing a sandbox is a good thing.
So there's document is crap, idea is maybe interesting. There's idea is counter to the goals of the working group. There's that's really neat, and I'm sure it will solve somebody's problem, but I don't know why you're here.
Okay, that's clear. And then there's the separate thing, which is depending on who you're talking to, you have to say bad idea in a different tone of voice or in different words or using a different golf club.
Right. And the last case it might be, yes, what a wonderful thing you've done. I suggest you go and talk to, and maybe there are some useful idiots out there that you can send them to. But at the same time, there's some people I'm like, wow, you're really smart and you're really what's going on. I'd really like you to actually focus on the problems that we have, because you probably could solve them.
That's actually a good point, Michael. The redirecting of obvious intelligence and energy into work that needs to be done.
That's a very important part of our job as chairs, actually, is to get more people who are able to participate effectively.
I found with ISIS that a lot of times I use the working group itself, right? So if an idea is bad, instead of just being the king on the hill that's telling somebody that their idea sucks, you know, I bring in the sort of experts from the group to explain why, you know, maybe in the meetings, during the meeting itself. And then I think it's taken better by people that way than if just one person by fiat is saying, you know, you can't do this.
Well, yeah, frankly, I think that's a better exercise of power to encourage the group as a whole to point out problems rather than just saying no because I'm in charge.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I think
when you have the time, yeah, getting the group to do it is great. But many of the working groups have too many things on their plate already. And if you then get flaky ideas, which might be interesting but don't fit, coming in, having the working group say that can be challenging.
So I think there's shades of gray here, right? But I guess I want to say that there's a kind of arrogance in assuming that as the chair you always know when something is crap. So you know, being able to step out there and say this is crap if you can't do it along with working group consensus, you might be the one who's wrong. And I think someone else made that comment earlier. So to the question of like how to tell people that something is crap, because sometimes it might be, I think if you rely on consensus building that something is crap, then you're going to be better off in both the sense that you're exercising correct authority, and in the sense that hopefully you're avoiding some kind of cultural misstep, although that may not always be true.
So there's the issue
so
when
that
you have a whole, there's the issue when you have a whole lot of, whoops.
George, could you let John speak? He's had his hand up for a little while.
Okay.
The exponential backoff protocol wasn't working. I wanted to respond briefly to Benson's comment and then also to introduce another topic. So, you know, as to the arrogance of the chair, assuming that, you know, arrogating to him or herself the competence to say this is crap, yeah, that's right, although there's, you have to weigh that against the disservice that you do to your group if you know, don't do any gating at all, because then you potentially are wasting the time of the entire group with a topic that was obvious to you was crap, and it turns out it was obvious to everyone was crap, but instead of one person wasting his or her time, it's 50 people or more. So how do you strike that balance? I guess it could be a topic for later.
Well, if it's obvious to 50 people in your working group that it's crap, then you as the chair, at least starting the discussion, even if you started as, by the way, I'm not talking as a chair right here, I'm speaking as a working group participant, I think this is crap. Then
well, what I'm trying to say is
you build that consensus.
But what I'm trying to say is that I feel like it's partly my job, especially when putting together an agenda for an in-person meeting, to pick and choose, you know, and especially if my agenda is full, to say, you know what, I'm going to give the time to the ideas that seem like they've got legs, and not to try to say everybody who asks me for agenda time gets it, no matter what I think of their idea. I will especially feel free to say, please take your idea to the mailing list and build some support for it before I give you time in person.
Yes, that's part of steering the working group. Absolutely.
And then the second thing I wanted to bring up is we've spent a bunch of time just now talking about things that are crap, and that's important. I also want to think a little bit about the flip side of that, which is when the chairs see something that is clearly to them clearly a good idea, and something that clearly ought to be moved forward. You know, what are the appropriate ways for chairs to say, let's expedite this. We're going to exercise some chairs privilege to move it forward, but we're not going to, you know, impose our will on the working group. That can be a little tricky, and I've done it wrong a few times, and maybe I've done it right a few times. When you do it wrong, things end up going slower instead of faster.
So would that be a useful discussion topic among working group chairs, or would that be a good training discussion? There's a conflict between those two, but it's a question of how much content development needs to be done ahead of time.
No, it's the topic. I think either one could be beneficial.
Okay, George, you've got your hand raised now.
So going back to a older question about consensus and crap, we have times where there are a lot of newbies who kind of support an idea, but the people who've been around for a while and know the technology inside out are, you know, speaking out against it. And I just want to have somewhere in this training, you know, a discussion of consensus of does everybody's opinion weigh equally or not?
They don't. Take a look at, read through the new RFC. It was up in the chat. on consensus, it's really, yeah, 72-82. I don't think, the question was consensuses, are objections met, and it's not voting, and that's one of my concerns.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so what other training have we missed? What other things would be useful? And for that matter, does what we've talked about sound useful? Where useful means happy to make time in my day to actually come to these and participate.
I'm interested in how you're planning on putting together some of this training and some parts of training, because some of the topics really require a discussion on what the training should include, or what the problem space is almost.
So maybe we ought to have sessions where we spend half of it on one topic, or 3/4 of it on one topic, and the last half hour or 15 minutes talking about how we organize the next topic.
So yes, the question is, how do we develop and deliver the training?
When we don't necessarily have consensus on what the content of the training is, or how to deal with some of these situations.
Right, so there's two kinds, there's a minimum of 2 types of training that I can see. And you understand that I'm brainstorming here and completely happy and interested in your ideas. And I'll get to it in a sec, Jeff. One is, there's some things where we can just say, deliver some actual, like a presentation, some examples of how to use tools or the information. Somewhere we can set up a round table where people are agreed beforehand to speak about 1 or 2 particular perspectives or experiences that they had, and have more of a free-for-all discussion. Those are the 2 of the concepts. Obviously, this is not a trivial effort to create the appropriate training and to talk about it, and I think we'd really like to have people who are interested volunteer and try and help work with us, and if there's a particular topic that folks feel passionately about, that would be a really good one to help work with us on developing what the appropriate training is. If there are any of these where we think there should be an invited expert, that's also something that would be really helpful to know, whether now or offline. Jeff, you've got your hand raised, so you next.
So a brief observation about the training is this does go both directions. What part of our problem is we're trying to avoid hurting people's feelings for things that we think need work or just are bad ideas. The other half of this is that IETF participants as a whole need to have at least some level of base expectation of that they may be told that their ideas are not good and need work. And most of these things really come back to 2 things. One is some level of base kindergarten skills, which does involve some amount of cultural sensitivity, but mostly it comes back to don't make ad hominem arguments, and remember that in theory the E stands for engineering, and that we should be basing our comments based upon good engineering practices. Talk to the discussion, the document, rather than the person making it or their language problems.
I guess raising your hands isn't working.
Sorry, I didn't. I was thinking about what to say. Yes, go ahead, Lou.
To follow up on your response to what I said, as well as if it's in the chest, on some of the more sticky topics, I think it would be really useful to capture the discussion either before getting the training as a part of producing the training or the results of the training, much like what was done with the consensus document. Training on track, sure, that's pretty straightforward. Who cares? I mean, we care about the results, but we don't care about the necessarily capturing that. I didn't mean to diminish those who want that training. But on the more sticky topics, I think capturing it so we can publish that to the wider audience, be it other working group chairs or participants, would be really useful. And in particular, publishing it in a draft, much as like what was done with the consensus document. If I remember correctly, there was a discussion on that first before the document was produced.
I think that you're right. What we're thinking about for this is to do wikis and facts, archive the slides, record the telechats for the conversation, and the different perspectives get recorded. If there are pieces that are important from this to capture into a draft and RFC, we could certainly go that way, but I think that's...
But you're skeptical. Okay.
So
I guess we'll find out over time whether or not it's worthwhile. And, growing organically goes well.
I think the skepticism may be that somebody has to write the draft and push it through to RFC, and Aliyah quite reasonably is thinking, not me. But I think that, you know, as we run through a particular training topic, and as Lou says, the sticky ones, if it becomes clear that this is information that would usefully be written up for the community, not just the routing chairs or even all chairs, and there are people amongst this group of 40 or so people who want to or have the energy to write it up, then yes, bloody good idea.
Exactly. Well, my concerns are, I want to focus on getting the conversation and the training pieces put together so we can have the discussion to train you all, since that's really my goal, is to try and get the routing area to be even more productive and have the ability to have good new ideas come in, have the ability to kill off crap ideas, have a good feeling of pride and ownership and so on. If we want, yeah. Beta code, exactly. Things like, if from that it seems like some of it is going to be timeless enough advice or discussion to capture into RFCs, absolutely. But I'm only citing for the first part right now. Also, having the recordings, I guess, what is the idea? The recordings will be there and they'll be, I think, publicly available, not just available to working group chairs. Does that seem like the right level of privacy? Are people comfortable with that?
I'm not a big fan of recordings.
I didn't hear that. You are not, or you are?
I am not a big fan of recordings for sort of working discussions. There's a difference between the formal meeting and an informal. I think it's great that we record the working groups. I make use of those all the time. That's fantastic. I wouldn't give that up in a second. The working group chair training sessions that happen, and occasionally the discussions that happen after that, I think are good not to record.
So my thought was to record the training and a part of the discussion, and then to have explicitly a good amount of discussion that would not be recorded. Because there's the delivering the information and reacting to that, and then what seems to be reusable, and then the rest of it, which is the private, but what about it, here's this example, that, and so on, which may not want to be generally available.
So I mostly agree with Lou. If you wanted to try, recording and not recording, I think it would be better to stop the recording when the discussion begins, so that people can be pretty frank about their opinions, and then air those things, and then maybe we circle back to those topics and have a more genteel discussion.
Okay, yeah, I hear, and I do agree that the discussion part in general I'm sorry, caveating. I hear the discussion part should not be recorded, even if the training piece of response to that is, and that's very good feedback.
Yeah, because otherwise you're going to have people holding the most important issues until you stop recording.
So speaking of this, yes, I think that we've gone through the slides now, and I'm going to stop recording so we can do a half hour of more frank conversation.
And I'd like to start that frank conversation